Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Blabbing with Booksellers, a Brighton Waterstones podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed and listened to our first episode. I'm really thrilled with how well it's been received and how much you connected with the content. I've had messages, people telling me that they're picking up books, which is exactly the point. And I'm sat here today with a guest I'm really excited about. And if you follow our TikTok, you'll be very familiar with the horror Rex from Rich. And you all ask for more, you ask us to dig into more detail and more content from Rich all the time. Well, right now, you're going to get half an hour to 45 minutes of Rich doing exactly that. Rich, how are you?
I'm very well, Phil. Thanks for having me on.
No, I'm really, really excited. We chat all the time, Rich and I, on the first floor of our shop. We have our fantasy, our manga, and more importantly, our horror on that floor, or more relevant to this chat, our horror section on that floor. And we are constantly and endlessly just talking about the history of horror, and
probably talk more than anything else, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, talking about books, talking about horror, fantasy. I get loads of fantasy recommendations off Phil, and I'm hoping he gets lots of horror recs off me. So,
absolutely. We're going to dig into some of them today, some of the books we've both read. Yeah. But firstly, as I did with Sam, I just want to ask you about your reading taste. So I know it's rooted mainly in horror, but can you talk to me a bit about when you first started getting into reading, what kind of stuff, particularly with horror, really captured your imagination? I know you're a huge Stephen King fan, but can you just elaborate on where your taste started to develop and how you got into horror?
Of course I can. So it really happened very early in my life, to be honest with you. My mum was a voracious reader.
Right.
She had a book on the go all the time. Mm-hmm. So there were books in my house from birth upwards, basically.
Right.
My mum had really eclectic reading tastes. She used to love, Graham Greene, Iris Murdoch, many others. She enjoyed reading some fantasy, which was very unfashionable in those days.
Right.
We're talking all the way back in the sort of 70s.
Yeah.
But there were books lying around my house, and I, from a very early age, my earliest memory of picking books up and just reading through and looking through them, not knowing what they were, couldn't understand the words, but something about holding a book just really captivated me from a very early age.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, as I'm discovering, like people who are listening probably don't know, but I've got a young son.
Yes, you do.
And my wife and I are very much discovering that, as you say, just having books around, there's a curiosity with what are these things that my parents are interacting with?
Yeah,
and that grabbed you as well, right?
Oh, completely and utterly, yeah. And I think, I started reading from a very, very early age. I think my earliest memories of reading books, probably from about the age of sort of 6 or 7 years old, I'd say. Mm-hmm. And I picked up The Hobbit.
Oh, amazing.
And there was an old battered copy of The Hobbit lying around my house. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what made me pick it up, but something made me pick it up. And the first thing that struck me, obviously, was the beautiful maps and illustrations in there, which just absolutely, I was just mesmerised with, I remember.
Yeah.
And so something in my young mind said, right, I'm going to give this a go, even though I was, far too young. And I got hooked on it, and I read that book. I think I read it from cover to cover, and then I read it again and again.
Amazing.
And I think I read it constantly for about 2 or 3 months, probably about 5 or 6 times over.
Absolutely.
Just couldn't stop.
Do you know what? There's something about. I didn't anticipate we'd be sat here starting our chat about horror with Tolkien.
No.
but it shows his impact, because his world building, I think, still holds up to anything that is put out today. It's so transportive, and I think for a young reader particularly, because I got hooked on The Hobbit as a kid too when we read it at school.
Yeah.
I wasn't a reader really growing up, and I wasn't a real reader until probably like 4 years ago.
Right.
But The Hobbit was one that absolutely grabbed my imagination, and I think in reading it, I don't know if it was the same for you. It was very much like, I didn't know books could do this.
No.
I didn't know books could take me to other places, could make me care about character.
Yeah.
And it's that, like, what am I going to say? It's that kind of escapism through fantasy that I gravitate towards. But as I'm, partly through talking to you, discovering you get the same thing in horror.
Oh, you do, absolutely. And I think, just going back to The Hobbit briefly, I think it's because obviously he wrote it for kids initially, although it's a hugely popular book, quite rightly, with adults as well.
Yeah.
But he wrote it as a kids book. And I think it's the ultimate kids book.
Yeah.
Because it's challenging to read in as much as, he doesn't, the language in it is quite grown up. He doesn't use simple words or anything like that. But the story, every chapter, is so engaging and so exciting, and just you can't stop reading it. It is the most amazing.
Absolutely, and you just attach to those characters. So, and I don't know about you, but like when the films came out of The Lord of the Rings, I was thrilled, obviously, because they're so well done, and the Hobbit film is also very well done. But I had in my mind my own versions of those characters that I now can't see anymore because I see the cast of that film. Gandalf isn't mine anymore. It's Ian McKellen.
Although he's such a wonderful Gandalf.
It's better than what I invented. Let's put it that way. So then, how did you get into horror? What was your discovery of horror after that? What age did that happen?
That's really interesting. So that happened. There's a very definite point I can pinpoint.
Yeah.
So as all kids did, got my pocket money every week. And when I was a little bit older, I started to go out and spend my pocket money on books.
Right.
And it was in those days, really, it was W.H. Smith's or nothing.
Yeah.
There wasn't a huge number of other bookshops around. But W.H. Smith was great, actually, where I lived. They had a really brilliant selection of books.
Yeah.
And I remember just as I switched schools from primary to secondary school, so I must have been 11, I would assume. Mm-hmm. I walked into W.H. Smith's and with my sort of pocket money in my sweaty hand, and I saw this book, and I had a picture of a girl's face, long hair on the front, blood on her face, and that book was Carrie by Stephen King, and something about it, I don't know, I think it was the picture probably, but something about it made me think,
I know the cover because it's really striking. Original cover,
original New English Library cover, and something about it made me pick it up, and I thought it's not a massive book, it's quite thin. I thought maybe I can give this a go. I knew it was an adult book. I wanted to start reading more grown-up books, and so I bought it, with my pocket money. I took it home, read it, and that is where my love of horror started. And it was probably luck, I think, because I just switched schools to a big secondary school, all-boys school. I wasn't having the best time of it, wasn't really fitting in. I was the sort of bookish, music-y sort of guy amongst
the nerd.
The nerd probably,
That's why we get on,
Rich. I wasn't enjoying it, exactly. And Carrie, the whole theme of Carrie is about this poor girl, who is horrifically bullied at school.
Absolutely.
I didn't get anything like that, thankfully, at school, but there was a real resonance in it for me, and I could really feel for her character.
Totally. And I think, speaking about King in a wider sense, I think that's why his books persist in my mind, is because the themes and the way you identify with the characters is still so relevant.
So I totally agree with you. I think, so I'll put it out there, I know there's a lot, he's been around for so many years. 50 odd years he's been publishing books, 70 odd novels, I think, many short story collections. There's going to be fans, there's going to be detractors, obviously. But I think when that awful day comes and he's not with us anymore, I think he will be recognised as probably one of the greatest novelists of the 20th and 21st century.
Absolutely.
In my mind. And I think, as you say, that one of the main reasons is he does three things, I think. One, he just has a natural gift for telling stories. He invents a story that will just absolutely captivate you, and he doesn't even have to really try, to be honest with you. It's incredible.
Totally.
But the other things he does, I think, is he writes characters that you instantly just completely either identify with or feel something for.
You recognise them.
You absolutely invest in. You recognise them exactly. And his place as well. He obviously writes a lot about where he knows, where he grew up, where he lived while he was writing in Maine. But the way the way he creates his own little world in his books is so astonishing.
Absolutely.
And Carrie was as his first novel. I think he was still learning his trade.
It's mad, isn't it? Because it's still so good. My wife and I picked up. There's the new special edition with the
lovely,
with the flames on the front and in foil and it looks beautiful. But in just revisiting parts of it, I didn't reread it in full. But I was just like, this still is a sublime book, and for his first that made it to market is such an achievement.
And there's a really interesting story because there's a book that's just come out called Monsters in the Archives.
I was going to ask you about this. Yeah.
So this is a book by a lady called Caroline Bicks, and she is the inaugural recipient of a fellowship at a university in Maine that Stephen King has sponsored, a professor of literature fellowship.
Yeah.
And she was actually hired, I think, because she's an expert in Shakespeare, but she's also, coincidentally, a huge Stephen King fan.
Right.
And she was the first person to be granted access to Stephen King's archive, which they created in his house quite recently before she was given the fellowship.
Yeah.
So she was granted a year's access to his archives, and his archive includes every draft of every novel, every short story he's ever written, all the way from the very, very first notes, first, second, third, fourth, fifth drafts with all the editor's notes back to the editor from Stephen King. And she chose 5 books to talk about in this Monsters in the Archives, one of which was Carrie. And I found it really interesting in as much as she read the first draft of Carrie, the one before he'd shown it to anybody. And although the story was very similar, that her character was still Carrie. The journey she went on was very similar. The way he told the story was completely different.
Right.
So he created. Not only did she go through an emotional change with the bullying that she was receiving from her classmates, but she went through physical changes. So it physically changed her. She turned essentially into an avenging angel, growing horns, growing sort of ridges on her back.
How fascinating! Because that's not what we now know as his voice at all.
Absolutely not.
Wow.
And I think when his editor at the time, when he submitted the book and they decided they wanted to publish it, one of his first notes was, it's going to detract from what we feel for the character if she becomes inhuman, physical, and and she becomes essentially inhuman. So all of that went in the second draft, and it almost became what we now know as Carrie.
How interesting! Because in that one change, that's what created exactly what we just cited as one of his best assets as a writer, is that you identify with his characters.
Exactly.
And if he'd been encouraged to continue down that path, who knows what he might have created instead.
That's the thing. That's a sliding doors moment.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Because I genuinely think if they carried on with that, it would not have been as successful as it was.
Absolutely.
At all. It would have been great, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would have resonated with people as much.
Right.
So I think that's a really interesting sort of insight into the way books are
created. Would the Monsters in the Archives book, is that a book you would recommend to people who aren't that familiar with King?
I really would. I'd recommend it to people who love Stephen King, first and foremost, because it's such an accessible and interesting insight into him as a writer. Because, as I say, she takes 5 books. I think, I'm trying to remember what they are off the top of my head. Carrie's one, The Shining, Salem's Lot, Pet Semetary, and Night Shift, the short story collection.
Yeah.
And she does exactly that. She's read through every draft. She describes his writing process from first draft to the finished article. She's interviewed him a couple of times, so there's some really good, interesting interview bits.
It sounds like an interesting one for prospective writers as well.
Without a doubt.
In terms of looking into the process and
stuff. Without a doubt. Yeah. And Stephen King wrote On Writing, which is one of the most brilliant texts for any aspiring writer. I think it's the most brilliant sort of tool, a book written about the craft of writing.
Right.
And it's still cited today by authors, however many years later it is.
That's amazing.
It's a wonderful book, yeah. But this one I would recommend, I think for fans of Stephen King, but equally people that aren't that familiar with his work would really enjoy it as well.
Interesting.
It's a brilliant book.
And if we've got listeners out there who have never picked up a Stephen King book, would you recommend they start with Carrie? Is that the best introduction to his voice, or because I think we talked about picking up Pet Semetary. That was my starting point with him years ago. So
Pet Semetary is a really interesting one, and I think probably is a really great starting point for anybody that hasn't read a Stephen King novel. Again, interesting story that features in this Monsters in the Archive book, which I think I was talking to you about a few days ago. He wrote Pet Semetary, and then he shelved it. He put it in a drawer for months and months on end because he felt it was just too dark,
too messed up
to actually see the light of day. And it only got published because he wanted to change publishers. He wanted to go from New English Library, New American Library, who were publishing him at the time, to Penguin, to Viking. And he owed New American Library a novel. And so he had this novel in the drawer, and he went, "Look, do you know what? Let's do this."
That's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, of all the books to just be like, I'm fulfilling a contractual obligation, here's Pet Semetary.
For me, I think it's arguably his greatest book. It is, for anybody that, we don't want to give spoilers away, but for people that haven't read it, but the themes that it explores are so incredibly dark and serious, and it's just done in such an engaging and wonderful way. It's an incredible book. I think it really is.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, we were talking about why I read horror. I think that's Pet Semetary actually sums it up, because it deals with loss, it deals with grief, but it does it in a way that I don't think you could in a book of another genre. I think horror gives you license to explore really serious issues in a very different way, and in a much more accessible way for me as well.
Absolutely.
And I think all the best horror novels do that.
Absolutely. I think that's another thing I was going to ask you about. Is we've talked in the shop about how we're seeing a bit of a revival of horror in a way. Not that it died and went anywhere, but there's renewed interest, isn't there?
It did actually.
You think so?
Yeah, I think there was a time. How long ago were we thinking? Maybe 10 years ago. Where it just had hit a bit of a rut. I think every horror novel that got released was very much in a similar vein. You'd have a vampire in it. You'd have a zombie in it. You'd have a werewolf.
Quite trope
in it.
heavy, like traditional
all very
tropes.
Trope heavy. There wasn't a great deal of new thought going into it. But as you say, over the last sort of maybe 5-6 years, suddenly we've just seen an explosion of really inventive, different voices in horror coming to the fore.
And I think that's what we touched on when we chatted, is like the influx of different influences, whether that's folklore or mythology, but also writers from different ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and experiences. We're seeing more LGBTQ plus influence in the genre,
lot,
and a ton more female writers, like Kylie Baker, Lucy Rose, Ling Ling Huang off the top of my head, who was it, Alice Evelyn Yang, who wrote A Beast Slinks Towards Beijing. Just all of these books are just Augustina Bazterrica as well, Tender is the Flesh, just so many outstanding books coming from new voices. What's caused that shift, do you think? Why is horror so relevant now? Why is it hitting with people? Why is it resonating?
I honestly think it's because people have cottoned on to the fact that horror is such a, as I was saying before, it's such a useful vehicle to explore difficult subjects.
Absolutely, agree.
And I don't think people got that for a while.
And
I think authors have suddenly realised, my God, what I can do amazing things with this subject that I wouldn't be able to do in another genre.
Absolutely. It's what I say to people about manga, because I'm a big manga fan.
Yes, you are,
I love talking to people about manga in the shop, and I describe it as a Trojan horse of a medium, because people pick it up and don't expect to have their own lives reflected at them. They don't expect to delve into the nuance of trauma or loss or grief or abandonment or attachment, and it's all in there. And horror does the same. I think people pick it up expecting to feel a bit unnerved, but they don't anticipate what they're receiving in the case of these books we're listing.
No, absolutely. And I think you mentioned, actually, you listed a bunch of books there that I think both of us have read, actually. And really,
with the exception of A Beast Slinks. I haven't read that yet. That's on my list.
But they all highlight exactly what we've just been talking about. In as much as there's so much more of a diverse pool of writers writing now. One of my favourite horror authors at the moment is Stephen Graham Jones.
Buffalo Hunter Hunter.
Yes, Buffalo Hunter Hunter is his most recent book, and he is he's a Native American horror writer.
Right.
He's a professor of English at Colorado University.
Okay.
And his books are all absolutely rooted in Native American folklore, Native American history, but he uses horror as a vehicle to tell that story, to tell the story of the struggle of the Native American culture. And they are just the most amazing books, and every one is slightly different. His breakout novel, it wasn't the first novel he wrote, but his breakout novel was called The Only Good Indian. And that's very much a folk horror novel. It's just steeped in Native American folklore, set in the modern day. And it's wonderful. But then he wrote a trilogy of books called the Lake Witch Trilogy. First of which is called My Heart is a Chainsaw. And that is all based around horror movies. So the main character is a Native American teenager. She's a real sort of misfit. She doesn't get on with many people at school, but she loves horror films and horror books. and she gets caught in the middle of this this horrible sort of slasher film style serial killer.
Okay.
And all three books are just utterly amazing.
But then it's a clever use of a very traditional trope,
Absolutely,
isn't it? Because we were talking about how horror as a genre, it sometimes gets bogged down.
Yes.
Even if the tropes aren't being used to a crazy degree, I think people's assumption is that they are.
Yeah.
So taking a trope like that and kind of turning it on its head is a wonderful way to do it. Again, it was the same in Bat Eater, where there's the ghosts, but we're using the concept of hungry ghosts from, we're taking unique cultural influences.
Chinese culture.
That's it. And then using that to tell a really unique ghost story that is new to Western audiences.
What an incredible sort of social commentary it is as well, because that's what we're saying about, I think, that's a prime example, Bat Eater, of a book that's so socially aware. The background to that book is the treatment of Chinese Americans during COVID.
Yes.
And the way that they were, essentially vilified for, in people's minds being responsible, although obviously they weren't, for starting this illness. And they were treated horribly in the States. And that's what this book is about, but it's done in such an accessible and readable style. It's a wonderful book.
It's a character you immediately care about. Have intense reason to empathise with them within the first 10 pages, due to reasons I won't spoil. But then, because of everything you said regarding like what was happening socially and the pandemic and the way people were being kind of vilified for the events that were taking place, we're looking at the events through the eyes of a character and wondering if it's their paranoia, their social anxiety and insecurity, or whether they are actually being targeted and essentially hunted. And we discover what is happening throughout the course of the book. A wonderful book.
It's an incredible
wonderful book, and for me
really
came relatively out of nowhere.
Debut novel as well. Astonishing, isn't it?
That's it. And I think again we're championing new voices in this genre. And Kylie Lee Baker for me is a perfect example of taking the genre into new places.
I absolutely agree with you. Definitely. And I think also you're right. This is what links Stephen King with all great modern horror, and I know we keep going back to Stephen King,
how can you not though, right?
What we were saying about the way he makes you care about his characters, and that's exactly what Kylie Lee Baker does in Bat Eater, right from page one. She makes you care about these characters very deeply, and then she puts them through absolute hell.
Absolutely.
And that's I think the beauty of horror, that you can do that. And there's another horror writer that I'm reading his new book at the moment. It's not out yet. I'm very lucky to have had an advanced reading copy of it. But that's Keith Rosson.
Okay, right.
So he, for me, is one of my favourite modern horror writers.
Right.
And he's so unique because all of his books are essentially rooted in hard-boiled crime novels.
Oh, interesting.
So all his characters are rooted in, they're drug dealers, they're incredibly morally compromised characters. And, his books are essentially, at the basis of it, these hard-boiled crime novels. But what he does is he gets that basis and then he turns it into a horror novel. So, you've got a book called Fever House, which involves sort of avenging angels and zombies.
Amazing.
But then you've got, the characters are all gangsters, and villains and drug dealers. And his new book, which is called Crone, and I think it's not out till October, but I heartily recommend it to anybody.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's set in a little sort of coastal American town. The main character is, again, this incredibly fabulous character, morally sort of compromised but wonderful character. He's, his wife died in childbirth. His daughter disappeared without trace when she was 13. He was a cop, but then fired because he was addicted to drugs.
Wow.
He came off the drugs, but then started working for this local drug dealer as an enforcer. He's a brilliant character. But at the centre of all of this is this sort of supernatural story about a witch.
Amazing.
And magic, and he just does. There's no other author writing today that does this, and they're so engaging. They're very violent, but they're very, he makes you care about these characters so much. Even the most morally compromised ones, you really invest in. And then, as I say, he puts them through absolute hell.
That's amazing. And, it sounds really fat. Crone, is that?
Crone.
Crone. Okay. Because one of the things I was going to raise with you is an observation I've made, but you'll know far better than me. What I'm noticing with many genres, but mainly fantasy and horror, is the cross-pollination that I don't think used to happen quite as much.
Absolutely.
And I'm seeing, like, again, as primarily a fantasy reader, I'm seeing horror elements pop up in Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, and I'm seeing it pop up in even Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. And there's those elements of really claustrophobic oppression that border on horror. Even if you go from romantasy and you're reading things like Rachel Gillig, those are dark, gothic, medieval kind of witchy books, a lot of dark folklore within them,
Absolutely.
a lot of haunting themes.
Yes.
And I think like even fantasy authors are going, we can nab from horror
Totally.
to add an extra flavour,
and vice versa.
and vice versa.
Well,
like, but then what you're just saying there about Crone is there's crime elements in that, and there's fantastical
completely.
elements in it.
You know, he writes like James Elroy. You know,
right.
Which is brilliant. I think,
Yeah.
You know, but they're horror novels.
Yeah.
And I love that, and I think that's pointing back to why horror is becoming so successful again, because people have found out they've got this license to, you know, borrow from other genres,
Absolutely.
from sort of crossovers.
Yeah.
As you say, there's a lot of fantasy that is actually becoming a lot more sort of horror based. There's a lot of horror that's becoming more fantasy based as well.
Totally.
So yeah, it's there's just that license that I don't think authors felt they had maybe 10 or 20 years ago that
Absolutely.
they do now, which is great, I think.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like pros and cons to like book talk and social media, and I personally think as a bookseller more pros, because I'm seeing more people come into the bookshop curious who've never read a book before, going, I saw this person, I like to talk about it. And I think horror is directly benefiting. Because of, and this is why I'll never talk down the rise of romantasy, because it does get, some people turn their nose up at it a bit, and I think in this store we really don't, but a lot of people think it's somewhat a less than form of fantasy.
Absolutely.
But what I'm seeing with romantasy readers is they're reading The Fourth Wings, they're reading the Akatars, they're reading Rachel Gillig, they're reading Samantha Shannon, and then they're going, what's next?
Yeah.
And from there, they are then curious and picking up books from the horror table.
Absolutely.
And it's just getting people into reading. And I think horror is directly benefiting from people grabbing onto things, picking up things that sound interesting, and opening their curious minds a bit more.
I totally agree with you. And I love, they're the most exciting conversations.
They are, aren't they?
When you have with those types of readers that are just sort of dipping their toe into the waters. And you know, it's great. I can talk to people. I talk to customers for 20 minutes, half an hour sometimes.
Yeah.
What should I be reading? What do I want to read? I've read this. I've read that.
Yeah.
And it is. You're right. And I remember when BookTok first became a thing.
Yeah.
I was, you know, I've been working here a long time, but I remember it, and it was the most incredible phenomenon. None of us really knew what it was.
Yeah.
When it first started. Because we're booksellers, we're not particularly tech savvy mostly. But, none of us really knew what it was, but we suddenly noticed this completely different type of customer coming into the shop. People that had never been into bookshops before.
Yeah.
They were coming in saying, got no idea where to find this book, and they were asking for the BookTok very much started off recommending classics, not sort of old classics necessarily.
Yeah.
But you know,
but big
like,
titles.
Yeah, Virgin Suicides was one that was the Geoffrey Eugenides novel.
Yeah.
That we suddenly noticed from maybe selling one copy a month of that, we were selling 20 or 30 a week.
Yeah.
And then we were thinking, why is this?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Because of BookTok, and that's when it started. It started getting this entire new readership came into bookshops, and we noticed they came back again and again, bringing different books. And these are people that had never thought about reading in their lives before.
Absolutely.
And that is the most wonderful thing.
But as you've realised through like the interaction with Horror Rex with Rich, Horror Talk is now a thing off the back of it.
I love it.
And there's a whole dedicated fandom out there specifically seeking the content we put out with you. And it's partly why I was so excited to sit down with you for this, because there's an audience for this. And I think people have been thirsting for horror to have its moment. Absolutely. And it's almost like this like secret subgenre of fiction that you kind of can't talk about, and now it's like, no, let's be horrified.
Completely. It was looked at as very much a dirty secret horror in the past.
Totally.
You couldn't admit to being a fan of horror novels, really.
Yeah.
But now it's a badge of honour almost.
Well, that's it.
Yeah, which is fabulous.
And same in the fantasy space as well, because even when I was at school, you know, I'm 39 now, but even when I was at school, being a nerd was something to be shunned.
Yes.
And now, nerd culture is celebrated.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it's a huge mass market and profitable for many companies. Think of Comic-Con and all of that.
Of course.
And I think all of these little subcultures that people were secretly celebrating, through the power of social media, have managed to connect the dots, and we've realised that these aren't tiny subcultures in basements.
No.
These are mass networks of people who are now going out in force and celebrating horror and celebrating D&D and celebrating all these things.
And isn't that a wonderful thing?
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
People are finding genuine real-life connection through a shared love of a medium like horror.
It's brilliant. And and it's one of the most positive aspects of social media for me. I mean, I've seen many negative ones, which we won't go into now, but it's one of the most immensely positive aspects in our walk of life. Definitely. I love it. It's incredible.
And we've both talked on the shop floor as well about how we love seeing that happen in real time.
Yeah.
Because I've been there personally when someone said to you, where should I start with Stephen King, for instance?
Exactly.
You've started making a recommendation, and then along drifts another customer
Yes.
going, I read that and it's great. And then you go back to the till and leave two customers who didn't know each other talking about their love of horror.
Exactly.
And those are some of my favourite moments on the shop floor when you're connecting people.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And it's interesting. It's just, I don't know why this has suddenly sparked my memory of a conversation we were having earlier on. Thinking about the difference between reading horror and watching it on the screen.
Absolutely.
I love doing both.
Or gaming horror.
Or
even.
gaming horror, exactly. I love doing both, and I think it's two very different experiences.
Yeah.
I think when you read a horror novel, or for me anyway, it's almost like it's an intense one-on-one experience with the author, with the characters in the book.
Yeah.
You're in that world. You're alone. You're in a safe space because this is all on on a page, not happening in front of you. But you've suddenly entered this incredibly dangerous and scary world, but you can do it incredibly safely.
Absolutely.
Whereas when you go and watch a horror movie, which I love doing, and I
absolutely
watch them, I go every week to the cinema to watch horror films. I love it, always have. And I'm old enough to remember going to the cinema to watch Nightmare on Elm Street when it first came out.
Oh, nice.
The original one, Hellraiser,
when
that first came out, both in the 80s. This is when cinemas were much bigger bigger in space than they are now. 400 or 500 seats in a cinema, and you're sitting in a packed cinema with 500 other people watching this incredible film. There'd been nothing really like it before. And just feeling that catharsis of everyone's terrified, but everyone's loving it.
Absolutely.
And,
it's a different experience, isn't it?
It's an incredibly different experience, but both equally wonderful.
Absolutely, I think the thing I've enjoyed discovering horror on the page, which again is a relatively new thing to me. I read Stephen King as a teenager.
Yes.
Again, I didn't read at all for many years. But rediscovering horror, and it's the power of your own imagination, because in reading horror, obviously you're at the mercy of the writing in front of you.
Yes.
But your real worst enemy when reading horror is your own visualization of those events, right? Because you're not getting the jump scares you'll get on screen.
That's right.
You're getting the creeping dread and the fear of what might happen next. And how I pictured the hungry ghosts in Bat Eater will be very different to how you did, and I love that.
Yes,
absolutely. I love the scope for kind of creating your own fear.
Horror.
Manifesting your own fear through someone else's words is part of why I love it so much.
But there's a catharsis in that as well, I think.
Totally.
Which is really important.
There's a book I wanted to touch on specifically, one you loved recently and recommended, and it was A Beast Slinks Towards Beijing.
Yes.
I wanted to pick it out because I think in talking about horror tropes and what a lot of books do and what they've done historically, I haven't read it, but from what you said, that did something very, very different in its approach to horror and where that fear manifested. Can you talk, just for people who haven't read it, why that book really stuck out to you? Because you loved that, didn't you?
Yeah, I absolutely loved it, and it's just very briefly, it's published by a little independent publisher called Dead Ink.
Who I love. Aren't they brilliant?
And they're becoming a lot more well known now because they just release brilliant book after brilliant book after brilliant book. It's Beast Slinks Towards Beijing. On the surface of it, it's a folk horror novel, I suppose, in as much as it's written by Alice Evelyn Yang. It's her debut novel. Mm-hmm. She's a Chinese-American author. The sort of basis of the story is very much sort of based around Chinese folklore. Again, hungry ghosts being part of it as well.
Yeah.
But the difference between this book and a lot of other horror novels is that the real horror in A Beast Slinks Towards Beijing comes from real life.
Yeah.
The story is, without giving too much away, the sort of framing story in the book is set in New York, but the vast majority of the book is set in China.
Right.
Both in the 1930s during the Japanese occupation of China, and then into the 50s and 60s during Mao's Cultural Revolution.
Right.
And both areas of Chinese history were incredibly brutal for the population of China. And the horror in the novel comes from the experiences of the characters living through the Japanese occupation of China in the 30s. Mao's Cultural Revolution in the 50s and 60s. That's where the horror comes from. And it's just the most astonishing book. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction.
Amazing.
Unheard of.
Which for a horror novel,
is
just
quite astonishing.
Absolutely. Well, we talked earlier about how horror and other similar subgenres are kind of thought of have traditionally been thought of a bit of a poor relation.
Yes.
And this is absolute solid evidence of finally that trend being bucked, isn't it?
And it's hardly ever happened before. There's a couple of horror novels, and I think there was the Costa Prize, which is now the Nero Prize.
Yeah. It's moving around the cafes one by one, isn't it?
Exactly, that's right. But the Costa Prize was won a few years ago for a book called Loney. By a guy called Andrew Michael Hurley.
Right.
And it's very much an English folk horror novel. It's a wonderful book. But that was probably the first horror novel to win a major prize in possibly ever, but certainly in many, many, many years.
Wow.
And then a few years later, when it became the Nero Prize, and this is only about 2 years ago, one of my favourite horror novels of recent years called Lost in the Garden.
Oh,
That won the best novel prize in the Nero
Amazing.
Prize. So
it's now on the radar, isn't it?
It's now on the radar, and you're starting to see horror novels actually getting recognised. So, which is why I was so thrilled that Slinks Towards Beijing was longlisted for the Women's Prize, which is probably a bigger prize than the Costa or Nero Prize anyway. I was a bit sad it didn't make the shortlist, but to get on the long
but
list
it's progress,
is an immense
isn't it?
achievement.
It's progress,
and it is progress.
Yeah, and it shows the strength of the genre. It shows an appreciation for the very real audience that is there for that, and also the caliber and quality of that work.
Yes.
And again, it's that subculture thing, and I'm like a gamer and a D&D player and all of those things, and those things have become massive in recent years.
Yes.
I've been crying out, it's kind of not book relevant, but I've been crying out for years for video game music to be taken more seriously.
And now you tune into Radio 3 and there's a whole programme dedicated to it.
But finally, I just think it takes time and persistence and people trusting in the art form for people to start taking it as seriously as it deserves to be. And, we talked about Stephen King a lot, and I think he's kind of separate to all that almost. Stephen King's his own entity at this point, isn't he?
Very much
and I think everyone else is struggling away in the pool, separate to Stephen King.
Yeah.
But and again, another one we talked about and loved, we won't go into it because talked about it briefly, was Sam But the Lamb by Lucy Rose.
Which is, again,
has done wonders for horror as a genre, hasn't it? So
that's another we won't go into detail with it. That is another perfect example of creating characters you care so deeply about.
Absolutely.
The main character in The Lamb, she's a child,
11, I think, isn't
11 years old. Without going into too much detail, spoiling the plot, she it's a story about abuse, basically, and about how she deals with it. There's cannibalism involved, as we know.
Totally.
But it's such you can empathise with her character so much, and it's such a heartbreaking book at its core, and it's beautifully written.
Absolutely.
It's the most astonishing.
I think really one of the wonderful choices Lucy Rose made in writing that book is choosing to follow the whole book through the eyes of that little girl.
Absolutely.
So you're watching these horrific, such uncomfortable events take place.
Yes.
The most horrendous situations and pressure cooker situations, but you're watching it through a gaze of innocence.
Yes.
And I think that, talking about empathy, and I think without empathy in any story, it will get lost.
Absolutely.
You have to care about the characters and what is happening to them and the world they're in, but primarily the characters and what is happening to them.
Of course.
And Lucy Rose, I mean, you even empathise for the mum.
Yeah.
You empathise for the friend that ends up entering that story as well.
Absolutely.
I think without that empathy for characters, particularly in horror, you're not going to care when horrendous things happen to them.
No, exactly. That's the point, and that's the alchemy of horror. And I think that's it's a terribly nasty thing to do, really, isn't it? Create these wonderful characters and then just absolutely put them through hell. But I'm joking. It's the beauty of a horror novel, I think. And,
absolutely, it is.
And all the best horror novelists do it. And you're right, The Lamb is a prime example of that. It's a debut novel as well, Lucy Rose. Debut novel.
Again,
incredible,
sublime, isn't it?
It's a wonderful book.
And I think, as well as empathy for the character and what they're going through, I think what I always look to see, kind of in any narrative, is consequence.
Yes.
Because I think I get let down by endings in books or any narrative art form actually, when the characters go through everything and they get dragged through hell and back, and at the end life's just fine and tickety-boo.
Yes.
And I think I don't need my characters to not survive, but I need to see them carrying the weight of what happened, to be changed by what happened.
Transformative experience.
Absolutely, to see the world in which they live changed, or them themselves changed as a result of the events of the book. And again, The Lamb is a perfect example. Bat-Eat is a perfect example. So and just to wrap up, Rich, because we know how much people love your recommendations. You've given loads today with Crone and Monster in the Archives, and there's a whole myriad of stuff. But as I put Sam on the spot, I want to put you on the spot.
Oh, no.
So, other than the books we've talked about today, we need a definitive recommendation from Rich. So, what have we got? What do you think? You've prepared this because you heard I did it to Sam.
Because I know you did it to Sam. And I'm going to cheat slightly because this is a book that I have talked about on a HorrorX video.
Cool. Right, yeah.
But I'm going to recommend it because it's current. It only came out a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
And it's just the most astonishing book. It's called Solace House by Will Maclean. And it is, without going into too much detail, I suppose if you want to compare it to other books, it's been compared to various things. Secret history. There's elements of H.P. Lovecraft in there. Shirley Jackson, who we didn't even touch on today.
We didn't. We'll be doing this again. Don't you worry.
But the essential story is the main character is a guy called Alex Lane. He's a university student, very down on his luck. Can't go home for the summer, so decides to stay behind in his dorms even though he's not allowed to leave for the summer. Gets found out by the university very quickly, but they offer him a lifeline working on a working bee with other students who are clearing out a mental asylum, a disused mental asylum, Victorian.
What could go wrong?
Exactly, in lieu of it being used for student dorms.
Right.
And they do that and it goes fine, but then there's another house on the same grounds that's owned by a sort of reclusive, hoarder, a very rich man. And they have to clear that house as well. And when they start to do that, they find all these very, very weird journals talking about the disappearance of his wife, and the fact that he's found this parallel realm that, and he talks about how to gain access to that realm. Yeah. It's the most amazing book.
Again, talking about cross-pollination. I mean, there's even the sci-fi in there.
It's sci-fi in there. It's psychedelic horror. It could even be all loosely described as a crime novel, possibly. But at the heart of it, it's one of the most readable books I've read in years.
Yeah.
It will hook you from page one to the very end. You'll be telling your mates about it. You'll be saying, go out and read this book.
Yeah.
Because and that's what I think links it to books like Secret History or things like that, because it's one of those books that comes along once every 10 years that everyone who reads it is going to tell everyone else they know to go and read it.
Totally. Well, I know that the way you talk about books, and it's why HorrorX with Rich is so popular, is really infectious. And I see that effect on customers, but also on the booksellers. Because after you put that video out about Solace House, Myrtle, our bookseller, picked it up, who doesn't traditionally read horror.
She doesn't,
and absolutely adored it.
She did, didn't she? Yeah, which I was thrilled about.
I'm just going to encourage our listeners. We know someone firsthand in the store who isn't traditionally a horror reader who picked it up and adored it. There's clearly something in there that resonates.
There really is, definitely, without a doubt. It's a wonderful book.
Amazing. Rich, thank you so much for joining me.
I've immensely enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Me too. I love that we've created a platform at work that we can just sit in a nook and nerd out about books together.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
So we'll do this again. I'm sure we'll get you back on to chat again. But thank you for listening, everyone. And we'll see you in the shop soon. Rich, I will see you on the shop floor.
You'll see me on the shop floor, Phil. Thank you so much.
Nice one. Bye.
Bye.